Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Now, crowdfunding is unregulated within the Irish market, but in spite of this, its popularity amongst Irish businesses as a means of funding their growth has increased exponentially in recent years. One man who has seen significant numbers of Indigenous companies benefit from this funding source is Chris Burge from Spark Crowdfunding. Chris, we'll be discussing Spark and the new EU rules for crowdfunding platforms. But prior to starting Spark, where had your career taken you?
Well, I started off as an engineer with my degree, but I've a number of years ago, I've been watching the crowdfunding, grow and grow in the various different areas around the world. So whether it be in the UK or whether it be in the States, and I thought, why doesn't that exist here in Ireland? So I decided to start a company that facilitated crowdfunding.
Now, Chris, of course, the term crowdfunding has become very popular over recent years, but for those of our listeners that have never dabbled in it, what's it all about?
Well, crowdfunding basically corrals a lot of small investments into a private company in exchange for shares. So there'll be, instead of one or two or three larger investors, there'll be lots of smaller investors that will come together and will invest into a company. And that small investment could be anything from €100. It could be as much as €100,000 there as well, and everything in between, and even north of that as well if necessary. So what it does, there's a legal mechanism that wraps all of these investors into what is called a nominee company, and that nominee company then is the investment vehicle that all of these investors invest through into the company.
I'm interested to find out what due diligence that you do on companies before giving them access to the platform.
We're very selective with the companies that we put up onto the site. So about 1 in 10, 1 in 11 companies only get onto the site. So we're very selective as to who we put up there. Our investors, of course, are very important to us. So we don't want to be feeding them or putting onto the site lots of companies that we have little faith in ourselves. So we take a company, we have a good look under the bonnet. We look at lots of elements of their legal system, their financials, and basically a full-on application, so that gives us a better insight as to what the company does. If we like it as a business, then there's a good chance that a good number of investors will like it as well. So it's only at that point, if we're happy with what we see, the application that's come in, all of the legal documentation that we've checked, if all of that is good, and we are happy that the valuation is of there or thereabouts, then we'll put it up onto the platform, and hopefully, as I say, a lot of our investors will think likewise and hopefully invest in that business as well.
So, for instance, is it a requirement that any company accessing the platform has to be a client of Enterprise Ireland or Intertrade Ireland?
There isn't a stipulation saying that, but nevertheless, a lot of our companies have been. I think, I'd say a good 95% of them have been. But you don't have to be. And we're happy to have a look at all types of businesses. And if there's one that's quite compelling that is not an Enterprise Ireland client, then happy days. We'll certainly consider it. But what the badge that I suppose that the company has by going through Enterprise Ireland, it means that the state has an investment into this business, or is certainly supporting this business, and that means that the investors themselves probably don't have to do quite so much digging around the business. They don't have to do quite so much due diligence on the business itself, knowing the fact that Enterprise Ireland has done a huge amount already as well.
And in general, are the companies that are on Spark Crowdfunding looking for investment registered with the Revenue for the Employment Investment Incentive Scheme?
Most of them are, yes. Again, it's another big feather in their cap, I suppose. Again, most of our investors, they want to avail of this EIS, and it's a very nice incentive. For those people who don't know what it is, it's a government-backed system, a scheme rather, that will give early stage investors a big tax relief on their investment, and that tax relief is 40%. So it's not a small amount of change that you get. So if you put €1,000 into this an EIS, a compliant company, then you'll get €400 back in your tax return the following year. So it's a nice incentive for people to take the money that is sitting on deposit in their bank and free it up and put it into a young startup company and help grow Irish businesses.
I'm also interested to find out, how are valuations of these businesses arrived at?
It's always a contentious element. Valuations are always kind of a little bit contentious. So a company will come to us and say, okay, well, I've got a company, I'm valuing it at X. And we will have a look at it, and we won't make any comment on it until we've actually had a look at it in detail. And if it's a sensible price, and and we are kind of going, that makes sense. They're not giving away too much equity, and they're not giving away too little. We think the valuation is there or thereabouts. Then we will put it up onto the site, and it's the market that decides. The investors that come on that are on our site will go. It's a binary decision for them. They either invest or they don't invest. There's no negotiating here. So if the campaign is finding it difficult to actually get the investment in, one of the main reasons might be the fact that they are overvaluing their business. So we tell people, we tell companies that that's the situation, and as such, they tend to kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, you're right, and there will be. We try and encourage them to be conservative on their valuation when they go up. This is the first bit of money that they're getting, and it could well be the make or break of this company. So if they're being a little bit greedy and say, no, I really want my valuation to be Y instead of X, and they don't get that money, then the chances of that company going on to be still there in another year's time is probably slim. They need that money in order to actually get it into the business and to grow and to kind of to hire new people and to develop their tech a little bit more. And if they don't get that, then they could well be dead. So we try and persuade them to be conservative on that. Having said that, if they have investment already under their belt that they've managed to get from other investors that have come in with a valuation of Y, and we go, okay, well, listen, if other investors are coming in at Y, who are we to argue against that? And they can go up onto our platform. And again, it's the market that decides. Our investors will decide to either invest or not invest. And if there's sufficient number of people who do invest, then happy days. The campaign is successful and they go away with their money. But if not, then they don't, and they then have to find their funding from elsewhere.
And of course, Chris, the role of Spark Crowdfunding is to introduce companies that are looking for investment to investors. And on that basis, what is the typical profile of your investors?
The typical profile of the investors is very, very varied, as you can imagine. As I mentioned before, there are people on our database who put in €100 for every campaign that they have, €100 each time, and that's their budget, and that's fair enough. But there are other people who are also mentioned who have got very, very deep pockets and are putting multiple tens of thousands, if not six figures, into investments on our database as well.
And in relation to the investment itself, the investor gets an equity stake in the business. So if they wanted to cash out of that at any stage, how is that facilitated?
The money that people invest into a crowdfunding or into a private company at this stage, their investment is very illiquid, i.e. it is very difficult to get that money out until there is this thing called an exit. And that exit it normally transpires to be one of three things. There'll be either a management buyout, where the management of the company decide to buy out the shareholders. That's a possibility, not a particularly brilliant one, because of course the shareholders are wanting to get as much money as they can for those shares, whereas the management team are wanting to pay as little as possible for those shares, and so there's obviously a conflict of interest there, but nevertheless it can be done. The second one is an initial public offering, an IPO, there aren't many companies that go on to do that. You've got to be fairly sizable to do that because it's very expensive to do that, and it's typically for larger companies. And the third one, of course, is a trade sale, and by far that's the easiest mechanism for everybody to get their money out, both the promoter of the business, the owner of the business, and also the investor as well. And everybody is aligned. Everybody wants to get as much as they can for those shares, and that's how it typically works. So the mechanism to get your money out is this exit, and that can typically be between 3 and 7 years, something in that kind of ballpark at least anyway.
And what reporting requirements are put on companies post-investment?
Another of our conditions for going through Spark is that they have to give a quarterly update to the companies that we've had on our platform, and of course then there's the AGM that they're entitled to go to as well as an investor. So there are 5 mechanisms, if you like. The quarterly updates that they'll get, and the AGM that they can go along to or take part in it in some way, shape or form. But the companies themselves, they've got a big tribe of supporters here now as well, and that's what we like to call them as well. All these investors, and there could be 200 or 300 of these investors that are in a particular investment in the company. It's good to bring those along. They're advocates of the business. They've got skin in the game. So companies will sometimes write to these investors, just giving them a quick update, particularly if there's a big flag waving opportunity that they've got a new deal with a new company, or something's happening that is noteworthy, and it's a good way that they can keep in touch with the investors as well.
It was recently announced that the EU has agreed new rules for crowdfunding platforms, whilst also safeguarding backers. Specifically, what do these new rules cover?
These new rules, they cover a whole host of things, and basically putting regulation on crowdfunding across the European base. Regulation has been in place in the UK and other jurisdictions for a while, but the EU has wanted to kind of bring all of these together and to make sure that there's proper regulation behind it. So really what it will be doing is making sure that the companies are who they say they are, and a whole host of other elements around it. But what it will do is it aligns everybody in Europe to the same one, and it facilitates the cross-border investment as well. So it's going to be a lot easier for somebody in France to invest into an Irish business, or somebody in Denmark to invest into a Portuguese company. So that cross-border investment is going to be a lot easier now.
And how will Spark Crowdfunding be taking advantage of that cross-border investment opportunity?
Well, obviously it means we've got a whole host of other people that we can market to as well now. If we can attract some companies that are perhaps outside of this jurisdiction but want to set up a headquarters here, and then we can kind of bring those in as well, which is going to be great. And I know Enterprise Ireland is very keen to kind of get overseas companies to headquarter here in Ireland as well, and we can piggyback on that success. But also on the flip side, the investors as well. There are a very large diaspora of Irish investors that are residing outside Ireland who also can invest much more freely with these new rules.
And finally, Chris, how do you think the crowdfunding landscape is going to develop over the coming years?
Well, there's lots of kind of different things that are happening. People are kind of, not just doing regular equity shares, but also kind of now incorporating convertible loan notes and different kind of mechanisms through which you can invest. So there are some of the things that are happening outside Ireland, at least. We don't typically do that. We typically just do the straight equity deal. We find it a lot simpler. People understand it a lot more easily. So we find at the moment the market is here in Ireland is just looking for straight equity deals, but nevertheless we are looking at other mechanisms, but also we're looking at the way that you can actually trade your shares at a later date as well. That's called a secondary market. So there are other innovations along those lines which are starting to come to the fore now as well.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Chris Burge from Spark Crowdfunding, and there's no doubt that these new EU rules will certainly provide lucrative investment opportunities for Irish businesses.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
South